Hi, folks. I'm Dan Dorcas, and this is the Emergency Mind Podcast, a space where we bring together lessons from the emergency department and beyond about performing at our best when it matters the most and applying knowledge under pressure. The Emergency Mind Podcast is brought to you by the folks at the Mission Critical Team Institute. So if you want to find out more about what we're doing there, you can find us at missioncti.com. All right. Guest today is none other than the great Harry Moffitt. Now, I've been really looking forward to this. We've taken a couple swings at getting this together and logistically hasn't worked out. Harry, I'm delighted you're here. I'm going to give like an ultra brief background on you, but it's never going to come close to capturing your true magic in any way. So you don't know what I'm going to say yet, man. Harry Moffitt is a director both at the Stoughton Group and the Mission Critical Teams Institute and a corporate psychologist. He's worked broadly across elite sports, corporates, and other mission critical teams. Prior to this, he spent 30 years with the Special Air Service Regiment and has nearly 1,000 days of combat experience. He's the author of the best-selling 11 Bats, Combat, Cricket, and the SAS, and has just released his second book, The Fourth Pillar, Modern Stoicism and the Philosophy of High Performance. Separate from that, he's also the lead singer of The Externals, a punk rock group who I have had the delight of listening to on a number of occasions, particularly long road trips. Harry, man, I'm so happy to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Mate, it's great to see you, Dan. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I want to say that all of that is real. And when we first started working together and having some of our deep philosophical chats, I was like, yeah, this guy does a punk rock band. But I just will actually say that is real. That is a real punk rock band. If you're curious and listening to that.
That's my favorite team. How that together, how we operate and produce something of whatever value it is to someone somewhere is remarkable. So,
right on, man. I wanted to lean in a little bit to the newest work, the Fourth Pillar book. And then I probably want to angle us towards a broader conversation about human performance in general, because you and I have had a pretty rich thing over the last little bit where we're digging into what is human performance and how does it work and how do you prepare people to really operate in incredibly complex and demanding situations. But do you want to take a stab at just taking us through the book and the why and why philosophy, why Stoicism, why a fourth pillar?
Yeah, so as briefly as I can. So to contextualize it, the fourth pillar is the first three pillars, if you will, are the physical, psychological, and social. And if you pore over any modern human performance, high performance program, they wittingly or unwittingly revolve around those things. It's uncontroversial. There'll be other pillars or parts or two programs, spiritual, emotional, cognitive, they formed under different things. But the fourth pillar is philosophy, and it's inspired from a guy by the name of Percy Cerity. I would strongly argue the world's greatest coach in modern times, a single man in a tin shack on a beach in southern Victoria, managed to train the largest stable of great runners ever, really, as dozens. And he at one stage owned all the middle distance, world records, gold medals at one time. And there's a huge story. He's a bit of a cult figure in the US, and as I'm finding out in the UK as well. So he's there, an enigma, a figure in the carpet type of thing. And he, with reducing his philosophy down, he believed that training athletes to run around faster and faster in circles was admirable, and competition was in his blood, and humans were built for competition. But he believed that in training humans to do that, there was a deeper, richer purpose, and that was to leave great humans to go on to their greatness. And to become a world standard athlete is one thing, but to squander that and let them just wander off into the world is remiss. So he wanted to create great citizens that would go on to lead communities and lead society. So at the foundation of that, he believed above the physical, psychological, and social pillars, all which he put as ingredients into his soup of human performance. He believed that a strong philosophical foundation was critical to navigating, understanding that. And through that, when you build a strong philosophical disposition of the worldview, a strong sense of self, a strong sense of yourself with others, and a strong sense of self in the world, in nature in particular, he would say, then you develop a training intelligence and you become self-sufficient, self-directed. And that's what he's wanted his athletes to be. He gave them a bunch of principles of training and life. They sat by candlelight in a tin shack and read Socrates and Shakespeare and history, and he lectured them. Very widely read and well written individual, but he wanted them to set their own training and be self-determined and self-motivated. And that's really what he inspired as a coach or a teacher. So that's where the fourth pillar comes from, Dan, and the book was easy to write from that perspective because I've been thinking, drinking from the Serenity Kool-Aid and others. I'm a Maslow by psychology kind of base. And I've read a fair bit about the Greeks and the Agogis and the military kind of training that they underwent. And I think it's the right time to reintroduce that discussion. And I think that I want to start a discussion about reintroducing some of these principles back into human performance programs to make them more human. I fear sometimes our human performance programs or high performance programs are in danger of dehumanizing the individuals in them.
Yeah. So I'll admit my bias in your favor as we start this conversation, right? Which is that I don't know if I've ever said this on the podcast or not, but when I first started writing The Emergency Mind, the first incarnation of it was actually a book about Stoic philosophy and how it related to crisis.
Yeah.
And it drifted away from that, thankfully, because that first draft was pretty bad. But the point underneath that, though, is that that's something I really truly believe, right? That application of philosophy is necessary and a really key component of reaching the potential or reaching out to accomplish work that really matters. And there's some obvious questions in there. I'm gonna rein back my own excitement about this idea for a second and turn it back to you to say, why do you think that's true? Like, why should anybody listening to this care about philosophy, not just the other three pillars of performance?
Yeah, beyond our bias, and by the way, your book is probably richer for having stepped away from Stoicism and embraced some Eastern and other outside the kind of Western or North Atlantic philosophical path that we all have familiar with. Good on you, mate. And I would love to do that. And it goes to a point about writing the book. This book is not for academics. It's not for scientists. It's not for people, philosophers. I've had some criticism from philosophers and academics. That's cool. I'm down with that. And I agree with that because it's in operator speak. It's in athlete speak. And the feedback from the operators and athletes has been overwhelming. And I love that. So the target audience is hit. And I keep it thin on philosophy. And it's really a small p. I'm not a philosopher, but it's a small p philosophy book. It's the philosophy I found it helpful to me in my journey to make sense of my former life was a job in war, in killing and taking lives and preserving lives. And that's a really deeply philosophical domain of thinking, being and living because there's no answers. There's no just, fair, wrong or whatever, and becomes philosophical very quickly. And so I think it's important for a really immediate reason straight up, and that is that I think modernity is atrophying some of the human qualities that we have, such as our ability to wonder, our ability to be in awe in the world, our ability to be in nature, fundamentally our ability just to be by and with and sit with ourselves. And I think this is urgent. I don't want to sound dramatic or overly dramatic, but I think it's becoming more urgent. And I think what philosophy does teach us through philosophical reasoning or meditation and contemplation and in philosophical praxis, pretty basic things, fundamental human things, it brings us back to those abilities and parks modernity and the distractions of life, the busyness, the 1.5 times of life. Everyone's reading books at 1.5. I actually think people are living life at 1.5, and there's a strange addiction to want to do more faster. And I don't get it. And so this is my clumsy operator way of saying, hey, to the young operators, beware. This is what's in front of you. You can't see it. You're being distracted. And maybe along the way, you can still be brilliant performer and an excellent emergency medico or physician. You can be an excellent operator and do your job, but don't forget what it means to be human. And here's a few ways I found really helpful that, in fact, the philosophers tell us. We don't have to go far to get the morning hack. We can learn it from some great thinkers.
Yeah. It's such an interesting arc in there, especially that concept of the way you started that sentence of I'm not a philosopher and this is a small p philosophy. I think there is this image of the philosopher as an other, some sort of a wise man or woman with a bunch of gray hair. Not to comment on the color of either of your hair or my hair, with a bunch of gray hair off in the woods, like separate
Yeah.
from life. And then apart from that is the concept of the philosophy from a vantage point of praxis, the philosophy that is baked into and lived through your actions. And the way you're describing that about your life as an operator, whether or not you want to address it, you can't do that life without engaging deeper philosophical sort of
Of
constructs to
course.
it. And you and I have had a number of conversations about this, usually over a beer in various parts of the world, right? Thinking through this kind of thought that to do medicine or to do what you do, you have to wrestle with these questions and you can't set it apart. So I guess I'd push back and say, man, if you're not a philosopher, who is and what does that mean? And like to somebody reading this, like, are they a philosopher? Is wrestling with philosophy enough? Or is it something you have to do to separate yourself from the rest of humankind?
I think so. You're a philosopher. I mean, one of the most significant moments, I talk about it in the book, of the last couple of years for me was when I pressed the link on, I can't remember what podcast you're on. You described what happens in the moments after someone's passed. And you made the point, the elegant point that no matter how hard you try, people still die. And some days you fuck it completely, but they live and you get it. And then you talked about the moments after someone's passed. And that still sends a tingle in my spine. I think that says it all, or it doesn't say it all, it feels it all for you. Don't need to. And that's kind of part of the point. I've had a couple of back and forths over social media with people who have reminded me that they are qualified philosophers. And that goes to your point. Philosophy does need an overhaul in image, or it would benefit from some, because when you say someone off in the woods, you think of Alden or something like that, and philosophizing and rubbing their chin or pacing with their hands behind their back, all of which I endorse. But more than that, I think these days philosophy has been retreated to the mahogany-lined walls of
Mm.
some university somewhere, and it's mostly men still dominate. There's a great book called Why Philosophy, or that explores. That's one of my favorites recently. And I think Western and North Atlantic philosophy dominates the sphere at the moment, and it's highly technicalized. There's this desire to want to put structures and ontologies and all these types of things around it, when really that's what being human resists all of that, when we're of nature. And I think the modernization is the goal is to predict and control and render linear and remove from context and put in a petri dish and study and then make often large, overreaching assumptions from being removed from context. And I would argue that philosophy should hold the ground to resist against that, to look at the whole of a human is really messy and hard and difficult and confusing, but that's okay. I think it's what makes guys like you and me and women like you and I who work in our organizations able to see the whole, not just the parts, to be able to zoom in and out really quickly and to be able to consider. I imagine you, Dan, as having, in those moments that someone's passing, you're already thinking about their family. You're thinking about them at a deeper, richer level. And I think that's a muscle that we must continue to work on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to explore the forces in culture that might nudge us towards or away from wrestling with some of those deeper questions. I think that's part of your thesis in this, which is that, hey, the sort of the gestalt or whatever it is of the age is drifting us away from really deeply encountering this and digging into it in our day-to-day lives. And that to perform at a high level, to be at the edge of ability is to wrestle with this not separately but together. It's not apart from how you're doing your work. It is part of your work. There's this story, and I'm going to apologies to any purists out there who's listening to this, but there's this story of some guy in the Zen world who was giving food to children one day, and the academic Zen priests came over and said, "What are you doing? You're supposed to You're supposed to not be doing this. You're supposed to be divorced from reality. You're supposed to not think about suffering. You're supposed to do all this. Don't you know that? And so the guy puts the food down and he listens and he's listening very carefully to them. And they're getting more and more frustrated because he's not doing Zen the way that they think he should be doing Zen. And finally, one of the academics goes, well, I don't even understand. What do you think practicing Zen is about? And the guy nods and he picks the food up and he goes back to giving it to the kids. Because in his mind, that was connecting to reality deeply. That was doing Zen as a praxis, as a technique, not as a separate thing, off in space as this dry, brittle academic space to it. There's probably a better way to tell that story, but I think you get the point to it. And I guess I'm wondering, when you started approaching this, what got you into that? Like, how did you start wrestling with this angle of it? And why is this something that you've become so passionate about?
I think you've nailed it beautifully, as you do. That's exactly the right direction to take to extend this theme. I had questions about how we were treating our operators, how we were growing our operators in the pipeline and then through their careers, because you don't finish developing at the end of training. It's a start point for development because you've now got more tools in which to navigate the world. And development, I'm a bit of a process philosopher, Whitehead, etc. And I believe you just don't stop developing. You're always going. And that the pace and amplification or the kind of volume of that is up to you. But I saw academics, I saw the psychologists, I saw the strength and conditioning coaches inside our domain as uninvolved in the operator's life. They were just bolt-ons to the side, and we did something simple, take the academics and the psychologists down to the range and let them experience what the operators were going through, because without having an understanding what that young Zen monk is doing, and without having empathy with that, without having some kind of positionality, understanding of their positionality, then how can we really help develop them? Because that's our job's not to make them better. It's necessarily that we can't make anyone better any more than we can make a plant grow, but we want to cultivate and nurture them as they come through, do our best. And so I developed a kind of a single liner that was, I wasn't interested in the evidence at that point. I was more interested in what was evident to the operator, which is the point of your story. That's what's the most important. And academics I'll just speak in my world, but of course, in my experience, but the academics, high performance staff, the consultants and the leaders who are around the development pipeline journey ecosystem of the operators, who are a rare asset. They're hard to find. They're really hard to train. We spend a lot of time and effort and we get a lot of reflected reputation off them. They are servants to the operator. And that's hard to hear, I know, for some, but that's the truth. And if we are to be servants, if we are to, in the most heartfelt manner, there's probably a better word, we need to be able to observe and empathize as best we possibly can. And I think the evidence is important. Don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-science, but I'm just saying that I think what trumps them in this instance in the relationship is what's evident to the operator. And I think that's something I hope I make pretty clear in the book.
Yeah, I don't want to come off like we're smashing academics here. Like, I'm certainly an academic, right? I think there's a lot of power in that position to do good. And there's
Yeah.
also this sort of potential to do a lot of bad, depending on how you see your relation to the rest of the people in the field and the rest of the ecosystem that you're operating with, not separate from. But you said something that I think is a window into a bunch of other conversations you've had, which is your choice of the word grow. And you're using these, I think consciously, these very organic sort of verb structures of growing and cultivate and nurturing, right? Which is a process about setting conditions and then allowing a thing to come into its own fullness, separate from the sort of more mechanistic words you might choose, like building an operator or building a team or, I don't know,
Platform,
or
warfighting platform.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't even know what to fill that in. Yeah. But tell me about that. Why are you choosing those words? And how do you think that reflects your underlying understanding of what's happening?
Yeah, look, any number of thinkers or philosophers will raise, in many books I've read over the years, have introduced me to the notion of metaphor It's decor of the mind, as it's called, and how important it is to young minds, children, just being able to just up and down, for example, the simple terms of up and down are concepts, constructs, metaphors of being in the world and being in place. Put it up on the shelf or move up, or which can mean move along. So that's a very basic, but the rejection, one of the ways, many ways, or praxis, or if you want to call it that, of rejecting the linear mechanistic world or keeping it as our servant rather than it being our master, I think is a deliberate means of how we apply our thinking for ourselves, and affords a really powerful way to start that. So if I think of creating or building, as you rightly said, it's a common word, or optimizing a human, it's never sat, when the term first came, it's only new. It's relatively new. It's probably only a number of years old. There'll be people using it sparingly back decades ago, but the whole human performance thing's only been around a decade or a little bit more, really, in our kind of world, in our thinking. But it leads you to a certain way of being in the world, and that's, again, as I said, kind of linear reductionist type of thinking. And that's not how humans. I don't believe that's how humans. I don't think a brain's like a computer. Couldn't be further from it. I think one neuron in our brain is infinitely more complex than the International Space Station and all the facility that surrounds it. And so, with that in mind, if I'm thinking about humans and our job, kind of thinking about teams, for me, it just makes sense. It's nonsensical to talk about a team in a linear fashion. We don't. I make in an essay I'm writing at the moment. I make the point. Again, this might be a bit clumsy, but it makes sense to me, is in the linear mechanistic world of science and evidence and things, which we need. Again, I'm not anti-science. I'm just asking for balance. 2 + 2 = 4. Yeah, and there's variations, and philosophers will argue over the count. But strictly speaking, when it comes to humans, 2 + 2 = everything. A lot of the times, but 4, it equals so much more and so much less at the same time. There's, again, a very rudimentary, ugly example, but and also science removes, necessarily so, it seems to me a lot of the time, we still haven't found a way to understand humans in their context in the moment, performing under pressure. It's all assumptions, because we can't be there in the moment with enough machinery or equipment hanging off them to study what it really is.
Yeah, you can't have them wear an MRI machine on their head walking around the things to really image the brain. And maybe someday we'll get there and we'll have better sensors and be able to do deeper investigation of it. But I think you're right.
And the question there is, Dan, to what end? So why? And then if by examining it and unpacking it, it's the homunculus versus Humpty Dumpty argument. By unpacking it and finding this inner code that apparently we seem to be looking for to control us and make us better decision makers, are we destroying the very thing that makes us excellent decision makers and great performers under pressure? It's a little like deforesting nature and then replacing it with pine trees, rows and rows of pine trees, foregoing the insect networks, the low ground mycelium network. Did you get my point? I'm getting off script a bit there, but
no, it's interesting. There's a tension there, right? Because there are times when to dissect something is to eliminate the underlying purpose of what it is, right? But there are times when actually understanding it makes it richer and deeper and more connected. There's this really famous, and I think it's Feynman, maybe, the physicist, quote, and he goes, do you think just because I know why the stars burn that I love them any less when I look at them? And I think that's really true, right? There are sometimes when understanding a thing and digging into it adds a layer of richness to it. And as a very tactical sort of square example of that, I would say the more we understand about the physiology of the human body and human brain under stressful conditions, the better we are at helping people understand themselves when they're in those moments. When you learn about, oh, hey, you have an autonomic nervous system that has a sympathetic and a parasympathetic component. And when your brain gets triggered in certain ways, your amygdala does things, and that changes your ability to view peripheral or your sense of time or whatever. Like there are details of that layer that make a difference. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's a possibility that as we discover more about as we build better sensors, as we build better methods, as we discover more about how humans operate under pressure, maybe we'll point towards really useful things that are provocative and interesting and rich. And maybe we won't. Maybe we'll deforest things and go into spaces where we break things for no reason and don't know how to put them back together. And I don't know. I'm not sure. In my mind, the die is not cast on that yet. And I'm enough of a techno futurist, which I've never said out loud, but sure, I'll claim that. Enough of a techno futurist to to say, yeah, there's more in there that's worth studying, right? There's more in there that's worth going after and learning about, especially if we can do it informed by the fact that that's not where all of the answers will come from.
Yeah, definitely. And not at the expense of what it means to be human. There's a very deep, richness to being human that I think we're already seeing. Again, as I said, I'm a small p philosopher and a small a academic, but I fear that there's signs that the balance is way out, and particularly in parts of the Western world. And I look forward. I've been in hospital recently and took advantage of great science and technology, and long may it go on, and
Sure.
hopefully eventually democratize it to the rest of the people, the 90% of people who don't have it.
Totally.
But I think there's a rich humanness. I think I posted recently about Kurt Vonnegut. He was having a discussion with his wife. I'll muck this up, but he's having a discussion with his wife, and he says, I want to send some letters out, and I'm going to walk to the post office, which was a fair way away, and buy some stamps. And his wife said, oh, I'll just order you 20 stamps online. I'll be dropped off this afternoon. And he just completely ignored what she said, resented what she said and ignored it and went off. And he said, along the way, these are the things I saw. And he lists a laughing grandmother with a child in the front yard. A dog came up and sniffed him and barked and ran away. And the deeper point he's making there is that we just got to be careful we don't disappear everything from our human experience. And that's the part that's atrophying. I'll make two examples that I see that worry me. Or one example to make my point, I think very powerfully, we've disappeared the stars, to go back to Feynman for a moment, who I think's a great philosopher as well as physicist.
Absolutely.
And maybe that's what we're talking about here, the balance, the science, the master in his emissary, as Ian McGilchrist might say. Yeah, we've disappeared the stars from our cities. We don't see the stars. So there's an aspect of looking at a desert sky full of rich stars. In Central Australia here, one of the darkest places on earth, when there's no moon, you can read the newspaper by the starlight. And everyone just sits and agog and stares. And we're disappearing our elderly. This is a sad, tragic indictment on Western humanity. We're disappearing. List could go on. So yes, let's charge on. Let's put Musk and all his nutbags onto a spaceship and go to Mars. He's an explorer, so do it yourself. And the far reaches. But let's also retain what's human in us and value that, because it's very valuable. I can tell you at the age of nearly 60, all of the really important things start to come into relief, Dan. And I can tell you now, they're not more social media, more junk in space, or more plastics in the ocean. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. They're more human and philosophical.
Yeah, man. I love it. I love it.
Thanks, mate. I don't want to come across as the old man shaking the fist at the sky, but I think there's definitely, it's definitely something in that.
I think you're also talking about, on a functional level, the old man shaking the fist of the sky to me has always been an image of everything sucks, and I just wish it would go back to the way that it was, and whatever, kids these days. But this is more a conversation about, all right, here's where we are. What are we choosing consciously, and what is being chosen for us, and how do we balance that in a way that sets us on a proper path working forward? And if you don't have that fourth pillar in there and part of your mix, then your calculus is going to be skewed. And it's not that you'll arrive necessarily at a wrong point, but you're going to have, in my mind at least, a lot harder of a time to come up with a thing that is as full and rich and meaningful as it would be otherwise.
I see it in the corporate world as well as our mission critical world. I don't think it's a major cause or relationship, but I think it's important and has implications. This sense of loss and grieving at the end of one's career, or and it happens in the corporate world. I work with hedge funds, and often founders have reached their goal. They've had their life-changing amount of money, sold their business, whether it be for 500 million or 50 million, whatever is relative to the individual. But it's not fulfilling. It's unfulfilling. And I'll sit with regularly, time after time. Today, I will. Later today, where they realize that parts of their life have atrophied. A really important part is there's in the Western world, and in many ways, but certainly here, one of the fundamental social groups that we have that identifies us is our high school friends or our university friends. You've seen that seems to be quite similar across many humans. And I asked them, when was the last time you went and hung out with your mates, golf trip, beers, watching the football, trip away to Thailand, whatever mates do. And a lot of them have just given over so much into their startup life, and I get it, and they're building the business that has withered on the vine. And these are the things that fall out of our consciousness that I think if we draw ourselves back deliberately, it would seem intentionally back to a sense of self and others and this philosophical disposition. That's where I think it helps. The book's not so much for that person, but the book is for the young operators, as I said, Dan, that probably are not thinking about this as much, and asking them just to consider how they are in the world and how to keep the whole of our life and rich and sustainable for the careers. Not only is not all of you, it's just a part of you. And as I said, I lay out in the book the things that mattered to me, and I am so thankful by fault or by luck or just by good mentors I was able to avail myself of, and I feel like they've really benefited me in my identity post career.
Yeah. I'm staring off thoughtfully here because I keep thinking about the internal work that had to happen as I was transitioning from not being a doctor to being a doctor. Right? Because you go through some irreversible changes along that path. And if for no other reason than you're exposed to life and death at a frequency and cadence or op tempo or whatever that's just so different than whatever normal life is, that you get just have this image in my head of like rasps and chisels and stuff, and you get shaped and sometimes built and sometimes broken down by that. And that transition is really important. And I think to do the kind of work that probably most of the folks listening to this podcast do, there's some aspect of transformation that happens as they start that journey or somewhere along the arc of that. And so there's this tension here between what you're describing about having a fullness, having a richness, having a depth, and also a depth of community around you and this humanness aspect to it. And at the same time, recognizing that to do this work requires doing things that are outside the range of average human experience. And that you actually have to drift. We're talking a little bit about like Joseph Campbell's monomyth arc here, but you have to leave society and go do this thing, or leave some pieces of it, or leave some pieces of yourself and go do this thing and become this thing. And then you can sit there with this thing and be like, okay, now I want to drift back, or I want to have this richness, or I want to have this depth. But I don't know, I'm tempted to say you can't really become this stuff without being asymmetric, off balance, focused, outside the norm. You can't maintain that rich sort of connection to everything and do this at the same time. I don't know. That's a bit of an unformed thought. What does that strike you as?
I'd say, why not? I don't know, just because we haven't done a thing doesn't mean we can't do something better. I go back to Whitehead again and this process philosophy that you explained it there, and I've thought of it that way too. You were part of the village. You grow up at 16, you leave the village, you go off to do this extraordinary thing, particularly in mission critical teams. Their demands are significant and they do change you. And then we finish that and then we go on to the next part and then the next part. And again, Whitehead would say, why are you breaking it into parts? It's all just one big journey. And it's you that are making the big deal about the parts and what's going on.
Sure.
That's not to say that an Indian street merchant in Delhi who lives on the side of the railway tracks isn't having a pretty extraordinary life as well. And then and it goes on. You get where I'm going with it. And it also reminds me again of Kurt Vonnegut. This is the marvel of that guy. Like, seriously, I don't know how he ever slipped my consciousness as a young man. But you might remember, he invented this this alien race called the Tralfamadorians or something of that. And he would say that they looked at a human like a mountain. They'd see the whole mountain at once, the life, rather than as humans do, see life as beads on a string. This was me then, now I'm next on this. And somewhere in that kind of metaphor, the story is a different way of viewing ourselves. And I think between protest philosophy, again, I think the training, I know you're writing about this at the moment and deep in thinking about this. And I really enjoyed the draft and I'm looking forward to hearing more and seeing more, because I think this is a really important thing in our world. We, as Preston says, we go off to the extraordinary world. We leave the ordered world of the office and the post office and bus timetables and run towards the thing that should make us turn and run away. But I think the current narrative, or there's just the conventional view of that needs thinking about. We need to think a bit more deeply about. And to go back to your point about when you're in the mix, of course, you need to be focused on, in my world, war fighting and doing your job. And it's, to a large extent, all you are in those moments. In those moments, I found that reading great thinkers, historians, philosophers, even explorers and geographers, Wayman Wallace blew my mind when I realized that he was probably ahead of Darwin when push comes to shove. Reading, they give you comfort that inside what you're doing, there's people out there, poor and privileged, going through their experience of the world, and B, this is just the journey. So just relax a little bit about it and see it as a collection of experiences that are growing an embodied wisdom within you. So my message to people who are staff, academics, high performance staff, leaders, consultants, etc. We like being around the Dan Dorcases of the world because they are special. Again, I know this sounds elitist and might make some bristle. I don't really care that much, but these people have reached the points where they are to do these really special things. We need them to keep doing. We need to support them. And in doing so, the Dan Dorcases of the world develop an extraordinary amount of embodied wisdom about the world, physical, psychological, social, and there's unmatched kind of unique, uncommon. And so rather than let them fall in a slump at the end of their careers, we should be there more than ever then saying, no, you have this, we're not letting this squander. We're not going to squander this. We want you to go on to be, I'd rather see ex-operators in the right ones in politics and community leadership and making decisions about the world. Yeah, over-explained it, but I think there is something in the philosophical journey I've had, at least, it's brought great comfort and reconciled a lot of their stress.
I think there's an art to digging into that and to balancing that and to helping humans go through that and still be human as they go through that and still want to be part of society on the other end of it. And I don't know if you ever read Heinlein's Starship Troopers, right? Heinlein has his own issues, right? But Starship Troopers is the very interesting thought that you just said in that story. The way to vote is by serving, right? You're not allowed to vote in society unless you have served society. I think that there's a fascinating parallel there to what you're saying, that how can we help humans go through these pipelines, do their work, do crazy hard, wild things, and then come out the other end and still be a positive force for society as opposed to
Yeah.
broken, isolated, bitter, poisoning the well for everything else. And
Yeah.
I don't know, I was not conscious enough when I was going through training to have asked these kinds of questions for myself.
Exactly.
Now that I am on the training side of the fence, I certainly try to think about it for the folks that I'm training, but I don't know if I do a good job at that or not. I think I at least struggle with it, but I think it's some big open questions and how fascinating to work on, how important to work on.
But I think you do a great job. Certainly the people I see around you when you're speaking are positively impact for sure. And I wrote down the Starship Troopers. The citizen thing's interesting. I mean, Danielle, my wife, who you haven't met yet, but she would say, oh, using the word citizen, and it sounds a bit nationalistic and harks back to, and I get
Yes,
that.
yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
it's certainly not my intent, but I don't think there's a better word. And it's where when I first come across the notion of the agogis of the ancient Greek. Now you're in huge danger here of idealizing these things. So
Totally.
they were into human sacrifice, women were subjugated, and etc. However, not everything in history should be thrown out or discarded. It doesn't matter anyway. It's part of us. It's in the rolling evolution of humanity. But there is a sense reading from the times of the ancient Greeks that to be a citizen was the highest first thing that everyone should be concerned with. And what does that mean? I extrapolate from that. That means that I'm here in Flemington. Got a church up the road, high school across there, police station, post office, very traditional little community of the 1890s when the community was built. And around here is a buzzing, beautiful, lovely little community. We see our friends at the pub. They walk past our house, etc. And it's wonderful to be in. And that's, if it can happen here, why can't it happen everywhere? And it's just a whole other discussion to get into. But if individually the idea was there was a more ubiquitous idea that to be a member of your community and give back to the community, give back to the tribe, whatever language you want to use, was your highest calling. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. When I say it out loud, it doesn't sound strange.
Sure.
And we've lost that to a degree. I don't know. We've kind of fractured and atomized into all these different little kind of groups and whatnot. But that's the citizen point, I think, hard to make with a young operator, because all they want to do is get after the journey that they've idealized in their mind. And really, this is our most important job and what the book is for. It's why I thought deeply about who do I want. The publisher kept saying, who's the audience? So it's not academics. It's not, we need it to be broad. And I'm going, I don't want it to be, I want it, if I get some bad feedback from NACA, that'll be, I'm on the right path. I want it to be for the operator just to say, hey, listen, as much as you can, and we'll just keep this in mind and let this bubble around, and here's some challenges. And as I said, the feedback to that extent's been overwhelming, which is great. And whether people listen or not, that's up to them. You're fighting. This is where you feel like the old man shaking your fist, because you're fighting modernity. And
yeah. Harry, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I want to give you a chance on the way out of this to issue a challenge to folks. There's been a lot of challenges that we threw out there in this, but as you're thinking about that challenge, I'll give our normal disclaimer, which is that our job here on the Emergency Mind podcast is to take the best of what everybody else has already figured out about performance under pressure and bring it to the world. We don't do medical advice, and all of our things we're saying here are our own opinions, not those of anybody that we work for or with. So, Harry, on your parting challenge here to folks listening, what do you want them to do differently?
I quickly scribbled down, just in case I couldn't remember it off the cuff, but I can. Look, I am on a mission. Am I on a mission? I am in Flemington at the pub anyway. I want to start a first human revolution. I Googled that, and there hasn't been one. It's been mentioned a few times, so it's not a new thought. But I'm sick and tired of the first, second, third, fourth, and fifth industrial revolution. Yes, they brought us great things, great comforts. They've made life easy, which kind of makes me uneasy. I want to make life hard. Kierkegaard wanted to. But I think that in doing that, we need to be in a balance back to being human. And a human revolution is to do human things. And here's my challenge. I would ask all of the people listening and further challenge, influence our young charges that are coming through that will inherit the world that we're providing for them, to do more of the philosophical praxis, find places in their life. They already have them, they just don't do them in the right way. So the list in the book I have is waiting, watching, listening, talking, reading, writing, thinking, walking. And these are the basic praxis that allow us to access the vast planes of our minds that haven't been mined yet, and to preserve those natural environments of our minds. And take walking, for example. Everyone's got earbuds in, got their phone, just missing out on so much. And when you say, what am I missing out on? Exactly. And when we're walking, the philosophical practice is not to walk for time, it's to walk for space. It's to walk on your heels, not on your toes. It's to look up, not down. And these are the things. And they sound far out and hippie, but I hope that they are challenging in a punk rock way, that we want to start a revolution, less the spit, blood, and not without the noisy music. I still love that.
All right, man. Harry, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thanks, Dan. Cheers, mate.